Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Increasing Your Effective Labor Rate. My name is Kelly Bennett, otherwise known as Kelly the Coach. And of all the calculations that we calculate in our financial management training, my absolute favorite is the effective labor rate. What we say we collect and how much we actually collect are two completely different things. And I've been tracking financial statements in what we call management groups. Many of the people that are on today are part of our online management group, where we do service advisor training at least twice a month, sometimes 4 times a month, in these short little silver bullets. And I just want to explain quickly what a silver bullet is. A silver bullet, we know that there's no real true silver bullet. I've had people say to me, what's the silver bullet? And I say there's actually not one, there's about 101. And I actually put together a workshop called 101 Silver Bullets. And the combination of all of those things is what makes the business run correctly. I've had people say, can you guarantee if I do this, I'll make more money? No, but if you do this and this and this and this and this and this, the more things that you do right, the more successful the business will be. And in my career, we've run management groups. I started back in about 1992, and it was back in the Bob O'Connor days, who was my mentor. And in that composite, we had about 160 lines of financial data. And my absolute favorite of all of them was effective labor rate, because effective labor rate indicates how the business really is doing. You might think you sold all your time today, and could be, but at what labor rate? So the effective labor rate is, how is the shop really performing? Now, if you've ever worked in a dealership, and most people that do work in a dealership on the counter as a service advisor, if you ask them, how often do you calculate effective labor rate? The answer is typically every day. Every single day we track effective labor rate, effective labor rate, effective labor rate. It is, in their opinion, the key performance indicator. KPIs are key performance indicators, and I just changed that to be service advisor performance indicators. And so what silver bullets are is we take one topic at a time and we cover it in approximately 45 minutes. I've got a 5-day service advisor class, a 5-day management class, and I decided to put them into bite-sized 45-minute webinars like you're on right now. And at the end of this, you'll see what the one is going to be. I'm going to be doing one again next week. Typically, we were going to be doing them every 2 weeks, but they've been pretty much consistently every week. So increasing your effective labor rate, again, is the #1 performance indicator for your repair shop. And I'm going to show you how to calculate your effective labor rate. And I'm not a micromanager. I don't think there's things that you should track every single day. But this is one that you may want to, or at least on a weekly basis. The absolute bare minimum would be calculating your effective labor rate on a monthly basis. But again, daily's good, weekly's great, and monthly as well. It's pretty good. The question is, what is your effective labor rate, and how do you impact your effective labor rate? What are the things that you can do to affect your labor rate to get it up to where it needs to be? And I guess the real thing, it would be nice if you could actually collect what you say you charge per hour. If your labor rate is $100 an hour, you're not collecting $100 an hour. And I find it interesting when people phone the shop, and it's not often. You're on the counter every day. You know what it's like. How many people actually phone you and say, what is your labor rate, or how much to charge by the hour? I'm not saying people aren't concerned about money. When a person goes to your shop, there's 3 things on their brain. What's wrong with my vehicle? How long is this going to take, and how much is it going to cost? With a heavy emphasis on how much it's going to take, because they need their vehicle back. And so money is important, and they want to know how much for the brake job, how much for the exhaust, how much for the alternator starter diagnosis, or whatever you're doing. But it's not how much you charge per hour per se. But the question is, and I was speaking with a member recently in Ontario and another one in California, where the law says that you are required to post your labor rate. And I actually pulled it up on the website from the Ontario government. And they say that your labor rate needs to be posted on your final invoice to the customer, and you need to indicate whether you pay flat rate or hourly. You're also supposed to indicate if your technicians are paid a percentage of parts. So that's kind of interesting. But the question is, what is your labor rate? And the question is really, what are you talking about? Is my labor rate $100 an hour? Well, internally, yes. But is my labor rate $100 an hour for an oil change? Not even close. Is my labor rate $100 an hour for a tire swap? Not even close. Is my labor rate $100 an hour for a a tire repair. Well, what is it if it's on the car and off the car? Because in reality, it's not what we say we charge per hour. It's how much we actually charge per hour. When we quote a customer up front, it's an indication of what the gross profit might be. But if the job takes longer or it's done shorter, then the effective labor rate changes. So when a person asks what the labor rate is, I believe the answer needs to be, it's variable. It depends on the kind of work we're doing. What can we do for you? You don't need to belabor it and get into a big, long exhortation about, it's this much for an oil change and it could be as high as this. Some people will say, well, it could be as low as 20 for an oil change or higher. I disagree with that. I think when somebody asks the question, then the answer is simply, it's variable. It depends on what we're doing. What can we do for you? And don't even get into that discussion. And again, it's a rare thing that people ask, but when the government wants to know what your labor rate, the answer also needs to be variable. If the state or province comes in and says, well, what's your labor rate? Well, which one would you like? Would you like the one for oil changes or tire rotations? Would you like the one for tire repair on the car or the one off the car? Would you like the one for diagnosis or the inspection? Which one would you like? Because in reality, when we say to a customer the labor rate is variable, that is the accurate answer. And so if the labor rate sign in your shop says labor rate variable, that is absolutely accurate. And we also recommend that on your final invoice to the customer, you can simply put labor rate variable. We do not believe in posting your posted labor rate or your door rate, as we call it in Canada, on your invoice because it probably wasn't anywhere near what you charged the customer. So the effective labor rate is simple. Is your labor rate your door rate? Is that actually it? Or is it your effective labor rate after all is said and done? How much do we actually collect for every hour that we sold? So when we say what our labor rate is, in reality, wouldn't it be nice? Here's some scary math. If you collected your full your full hourly rate, if you did this, if you took how many hours you paid your technicians, say last month, and the calculations we're going to look at here are monthly, but you would do it daily, monthly, weekly, annually, quarterly, whatever way you want to do it, as long as you add the data from those numbers right into here. So if you took how many hours you paid your technicians in a month and multiplied that by your actual labor rate, your posted rate, you would see what your potential labor, and I make it clear, only sales are. We're not looking at sales of parts or sublet or tires or towing or shop supplies or environmental fees. We're only looking at labor. So when the effective labor rate is said and done, did we get paid what we say we charge for every hour we paid our technicians? Now, I just want to say up front that there's 3 ways to actually calculate effective labor rate. We're going to focus on what I believe is the most important one. And this is going to affect you then whether you pay hourly or you pay your technicians flat rate. Because what it's asking you is how many monthly paid hours to your technicians. Now, there's another calculation where you actually calculate how many hours that you actually sold to your technician, and sometimes your shop management system can track that, but most people don't track it that way. At the end of the month, they know how many hours they paid their technicians. So all you need to do is take how many hours you paid your technicians, multiply that by your labor rate, and look at what the sales could have been if you charged your customer, let's say $100 for an hour for every single hour that you paid your technicians. And I can tell you that the average shop's effective labor rate is only 67%. What that means is that if your labor rate is $100 an hour, effectively it's only $67 an hour in an independent repair shop. Unfortunately to us, I guess, the average dealership's effective labor rate in Canada and the US is 136%. Now, why that's significant? I was in a shop one time and somebody's labor rate was quite low. And I said, wow, that's pretty low. He said, well, we need to be lower than the dealership. Well, I'm not sure where that's written, but if that's what you think, I don't believe that's the case. If you take a look at auto repair, independent repair shops have the highest fix-it-right score. Why is that? Because we will take the time to make sure that it's repaired correctly. In dealerships, they have an advantage, or maybe even a disadvantage, is that the parts store is right there in the same building, so they don't spend a whole lot of time waiting for parts. Now, the problem with that is they can take what they call replacing it with a known good part, take off the part they think it needs to be, put on a new one, and if it doesn't fix the problem, put that part back on the shelf. Well, we'd have to return it if it's an electrical part, maybe not. And so it's a little bit more challenging. So we make sure we take the time to make sure that it's done correctly. Unfortunately, most shops don't charge a higher rate for that diagnostics. We've got Patty on the meeting today, and she's been phoning shops that are in the neighborhood of our group shops, explaining who we are, Kelly the coach. We have a management group and a series of questions. And I asked her yesterday, of the phone calls that you're making, what is the biggest surprise you have? And her response was that nobody, not one of these independent repair shops, had an effective labor rate that was higher for diagnostics. They were charging the same labor rate. And you know the problem with that, do you get paid for every single hour of diagnosis you've performed? My question here would be, how much time have you given away? How much diagnostics did you not charge for because you thought you should have found the problem earlier, or we started at the wrong end of the horse, or whatever it might be? We need to make sure we get paid for all the diagnostics at the correct labor rate, and effectively it needs to be higher than our labor rate. And we have a whole webinar just on the subject of selling diagnostic labor, which is one of my favorites. But back to this. So this shop said my labor rate is just a couple of dollars lower than the dealership because they thought they had to be. But in reality, what's interesting is, what is the effective labor rate? What we say we charge, what the dealership says they charge, is not really important. At the end of the day, literally in this case, at the end of the day, what did we effectively charge our customers for every hour that we sold? So let's use the illustration of a $100 an hour labor rate for the independent shop and a $100 an hour labor rate, for the dealership. So if the effective labor rate in an independent repair shop is 67%, that would mean their effective labor rate was $67 an hour. The dealership with a $100 an hour labor rate that looks like the same is effectively collecting on average of 136%. Now, I'm not saying every single dealership out there is collecting 136%. I've done some training with some dealerships that are, interestingly enough, almost as low as an independent. But most dealerships are really, really good at their productivity and their efficiency and their labor and all those kinds of things. My experience is, and I was talking to somebody about it last week, is that I was doing an on-site evaluation at a shop. I spent 3 full days there. And each one of the technicians in this case had worked in dealerships. Now they were working for an independent repair shop. And I knew exactly why. The dealership typically has too much structure, way too much structure, and you feel like a number. And, it's kind of neatly set up in that techs work on cars, and there's parts people, and there's people on the counter, and then there's the management and the owners, and they don't usually do each other's jobs. But the problem is you can feel like you're not really a real person, and there's the lack of whatever it can be. And that's not always the case, but oftentimes it is. But here's my experience, is that dealerships have too much structure and independents have too little structure. And if we can take some of that structure from the dealership and put it into an independent repair shop, we really could do amazing things. It's when we track productivity, and it's when we track efficiency. And yet I would safely say, after training all across the US, I've been to all 50 states, all across Canada, I can tell you that at least 90% of independent repair shops do not use a time clock or some kind of tracking system to find out what's happening with their labor inventory. That's where dealerships shine. Back in the day, it was the lick 'em and stick 'em, and they would punch in the morning, and then they punch in and out of every labor operation throughout the day. Not just per vehicle, but every single labor operation. So at the end of the day, they truly know what was our productivity today, what was our efficiency today, and what was our proficiency today. What percentage of our inventory did we sell? And I encourage independent repair shops, whether it's a time clock system, the key card system that's electronic, in your shop management system. Almost every single shop management system out there has a time clock capability built into it, and yet most independents don't use it. And that's the biggest problem. When we don't track our labor inventory, when we don't really find out what's happening with the hours. And I'll give you one quick illustration that some of you have heard me use before, but I find it very effective. Let's say that at 8 o'clock in the morning, you have 8 spark plugs that are dropped off at your shop by your part vendor right at 8, and you look and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you know that day that 8 of those were installed in a customer's vehicle. Sorry, 4 of them were installed in a customer's vehicle. But at the end of the day, the other 4 that you saw in the morning are gone. They're just gone. You never do find them anywhere. The next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 tires are dropped off at your shop, and you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And yet that day, 4 of those were installed in a customer's vehicle. And at the end of the day, the other 4 went missing. And the question I always ask is, how long would it take the average owner to freak out to find out where these tires or plugs are going, day one or day 2? Well, it'd be day 1. We bought 8, we sold 4, where are the other 4? And yet in an average independent repair shop at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 hours per tech of inventory shows up. Typically 8 hours in a day, it might be 8.5, whatever, depending on what the lunch break is. But you typically have 8 hours of inventory in a day. The average independent repair shop only sells about 45 to 55% of those hours. So if a shop has 8 hours per tech per day and only sells 4 of each hours, or 5, why don't they wonder what happened to the other 3 hours? Because labor is an inventory. Every day you buy parts, you mark them up for a desired gross profit, and you sell them. And every single day you buy time. You buy your technician's time, you mark that up, which becomes your labor rate. So the labor rate needs to be where it needs to be. And once your labor rate is established where it needs to be, then it's a matter of focusing on effective labor rate. So my labor rate's 100, but I wish I could collect 100. And back to the scary math at the top, I encourage you to do this. How many hours did you pay your technicians last month? What is your posted rate? And what's your potential labor sales? And if you do have a higher diagnostic rate, you need to do that calculation as well. The shop that I was in last week, and it's so sad, and I don't make stuff up, they were selling about 40 to 42% of their labor inventory. They had a quasi time clock system, but they really weren't tracking that correctly. They had a good labor rate. It was over $100 an hour, and they had a good diagnostic rate, which was about $150 an hour, which is great. But when all is said and done, I said, how often do you actually charge out that effective labor rate for diagnostics? He said, well, you're right, we don't. Because at the end of the day, the technician, when I look at their time card, does not punch in and out of each labor operation. They punch out at each vehicle. And the time clock has such limited information, they can see 45 minutes, but was that 45 minutes repair, or was that 45 minutes of diagnostics? So in this case, it's a fleet company. Most stuff is charged by how long the job takes and not quoted up front. And so at the end of the day, he needs to be able to determine how much of this was diagnostics and how much of it was labor. And bottom line is their labor rate, the effective labor rate was horrific. And I did encourage them to focus on increasing that labor rate effectively. So again, the labor rate that we say we charge and how much we actually charge are 2 totally different things. And again, do that scary math at the top, and you'll find out that in most cases, that potential labor sales is really the same kind of math. That's where you take that dollar amount that your labor rate actually was, and what your labor sales should have been and what they really were. And it really comes out to the same math. It's about 67%. So in reality, effective labor rate really can be looked at in 2 ways, which is actually a combination of the 2. Did you sell all of your hours today at only 67%? Or 67% of your time sold today? Or did you only collect about 67% of your labor rate effectively? And I'll use those words interchangeably. I do like using the expression increasing your labor rate effectively, not just increasing labor rate, because it makes sense of what we're doing, because there's the verb there. What do we need to do to increase our labor rate effectively? Now, dealerships, one of the reasons they have 136%, there's actually 3 that I have there. And number 1 is that they typically have the same type of vehicle. Not always, but usually they focus on just one brand of vehicle. So they have the same kind of vehicle coming in and out every single day. So the way I word it is they have one animal and we have the entire zoo. And I think it's more difficult to be a technician in an independent repair shop than in a dealership, because in one given day, how many different vehicles will you work on? There's somewhere around 4,000 different years, makes, and models of vehicles out there. Not that we see them all, but we don't really know what's coming in unless we do specialize. I did a lot of work for Worldpac over the years. I did training for them, and we ran management groups. And a lot of them specialized in BMW only, or Audi BMW, Mercedes, whatever it might be. And that is helpful in that you're going to see pattern failures. What you saw yesterday, you're going to see again next week. And the dealerships, they see this problem, they see it again, and the vehicle comes in. Now that can be a problem because there could be blinders on and they think, oh, I know what this is, and go at that, and it was actually something else. So trying to skip the diagnostics process. So, but one of the reasons that at 136%, and we don't really expect an independent repair shop to be at 136%. You can get fairly close to it depending on how you break down your time, and do you track productivity and efficiency, and what's your diagnostic rate, and a lot of other factors you're going to see below. And as I mentioned already, the parts store is in the exact same building, and they sell lots and lots and lots of factory scheduled maintenances. I don't know what the percentage is average in an average dealership, but they sell a lot of maintenance. And I find the mentality of some customers is, I bring my vehicle to the dealership for maintenance because I need to maintain my warranty. But if it's just an oil change or a broken car, maybe I'll bring that to an independent repair shop. And we did that to ourselves, I think, by calling ourselves repair shops. We need to get much better at selling maintenance. The question is, of all the work you do in a day, how much was maintenance and how much was repair? And I encourage you to look at your schedule, whether it's online or paper or whatever, and just look, let's say, at a week or maybe even a month, and go through the day and say, okay, that was diagnostics, that was diagnostics, that was inspection, maintenance, repair, and get a sense of what percentage of the work that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is maintenance, because the money is definitely in the maintenance. And dealerships are really, really good at selling maintenance. You'll see it a little later on that the way I perceive it is that repairs are bought, maintenance is sold. If I come to your shop and my brakes are metal to metal, you don't need to sell me brakes. I'm buying brakes because my brakes are metal to metal. And you give me an estimate and you go ahead with the repair. Not that that's not a gravy job, it certainly can be. But the point is, the reason I'm at your shop is because I already have a problem. And there's some money in that, but the real money is when it's the factory schedule maintenance. If they're there for a repair, it's probably not going to be anywhere near as profitable as a 96,000 K or 60,000 mile service. And when we sell those, the book time is much better, and we get better and better and better the more we sell maintenance. So the difference is, dealerships, for the most part, are geared up to sell maintenance. The one in my town, for example, Cochrane, Alberta, I don't live there anymore, but it was a dealership that I went into. I bought my vehicle there. And behind the service advisor counter, they had package A, package B, package C, package D, and then they would show the mileage in smaller letters below that. So when you'd go up, they'd look and say, oh, Kelly, so you've got this many miles on your vehicle, and so you are ready for a level 2 or package 2, whatever they call it. And so this is the work that the manufacturer recommends for your vehicle to maintain your warranty and save mileage on fuel, or money on fuel, etc. But below that was the plus, and it had a yellow starburst around it. It was called the plus package. And they'd say, because the manufacturer recommends the top portion of here, but we recommend because of the what? Because of the driving conditions, the severe driving conditions, the stop and go. In Cochrane, most people worked in the city. In Calgary, back and forth, harder on the vehicle. When you're in a city like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or LA or New York, and you're spending 87 hours a year idling, not just commuting, but 87 hours of idle time, that's a lot harder on the vehicle. And that's, by the way, the biggest difference when you take a look at ALLDATA or Mitchell or other data that you see online, what should be done at a specific interval. The biggest difference is what is regular and what is called severe, and what place does not have severe driving conditions. But my point is that it's a sign. It's huge. It's behind the advisor. They make it very simple. Would you like package A, package B, package C, package D? Basically, which full meal would you like? And on the top of that, we can add our plus package to that. And in reality, what they're doing is selling you gravy with gravy on top of that gravy. There's nothing wrong with doing that. When a vehicle is maintained correctly, there's a lot of great things that happen. And of course, I did a webinar a little while ago where we took a look at the 7 major benefits of factory recommended service. And again, repairs are bought, people come in to buy them, maintenance is sold. It's when we point out to them that they should do this at the 60,000 mile interval. A timing belt's a good example of that. The timing belt's not broken right now, hopefully for the customer. And we indicate that we should perform a timing belt replacement. And the reason that you want to do that, and explain that it could prevent, a serious breakdown and a lot of money, etc. One quick story of that was a fellow in Ontario. Just recently, he had told the customer, you need to have your timing belt replaced. You should. It's at that point and, a little over actually. And you've got an interference engine that could cost you a lot of money. He said, you know what? He said, I'll just let it stretch for a little, I'll let it go a little while. How much notice does a timing belt give you that is going to go? People say right away, well, actually, it's about 120,000 miles or so. And then you never know. True story, this guy ended up driving across the border. He's in the U.S. buying gas and shopping, and his timing belt goes. So he had to have that vehicle towed back into Canada, which was a nightmare because he had to find a tow truck driver that had a passport, because it won't let you cross the border without a passport. And so it took a long time to find a tow truck driver with a passport to get the vehicle towed back. And so it's at the border and the charging time for that. And because there's a lineup, and the guy came and said, boy, I wish I would have replaced the timing belt. Well, we told them what to do. Ultimately, it's the customer's choice. It's the customer's money. But as we've covered in other training sessions, your job every single day is E&A, E&A, E&A. Educate and advise, educate and advise. I'm going to use the shops from a real, the numbers from a real shop. So I'm taking a shop. Just got to take a sip of my water here. They did in 1 month $20,295 of labor-only sales. In reality here, it doesn't really matter how big the shop is per se. How many techs you have is really immaterial when it comes to the effective labor rate. You can have a shop that has 2 technicians that has a higher effective labor rate than a shop that has 3 or 4, because it all relates to how much money did you collect in labor, how many hours did you pay your technicians. So in this particular case, this shop did in 1 month $20,295 in labor only. And I want to make that clear. Never add parts or sublet or tires or towing or shop supplies or environmental fees. Now, one of the things that kind of blows my mind recently is I've seen some income statements, one just recently, where they had a shop management system that kind of broke down labor and parts, but it didn't really break down sublet or tires or towing, and that was mixed into parts. That kind of stuff happens a lot. But the bookkeeper took that data, and all it said is, well, they had a body shop too, and all it said is mechanical revenue and body revenue. So you look at this amount of money, $20,295, and you say, how much was labor? I don't know. How much was parts? I don't know. How much was sublet, tires, towing? I don't know. So you need to know that. And some shop management systems only break down labor and parts, which is okay for this calculation. It's kind of useless for a bunch of the other ones, but at least you can do that with just a breakdown, in this case, of labor and parts separately. This shop paid 321 hours to their technicians, so their effective labor rate was only $63.22 an hour. Now, on the bottom, you see the divided by $90, so that's what their labor rate, or in Canada, I hate the expression door rate, but we understand what that means. It's what does it cost? And door rate is clearly a Canadian terminology, not a US. If a repair shop calls you and says, what's your door rate? It's pretty obvious. It's another shop trying to phone you and find out what you charge. So when somebody asks you what your door rate is, say it's $165 an hour, but you better get your butt in here now because it's going up to $195 this afternoon. Anyway, so the calculation is simple. We take how much we did in labor sales for the month, the day, the week, the year, the quarter, whatever period of time, divided by the number of paid hours in that same time period, and we see the effective labor rate. The calculation is the same, 63.22, divided by what we say we charge 90, which in this case, the shop was collecting, it was like 70.07, so I just put it at 70. So they're only collecting 70% of that $90 per hour, and that's horrific. So they're a little bit better than the average shop, but they're certainly a lot lower than where they should be. And our goal, so you know, is 125%. So if your labor rate's $100 an hour, we would like you to effectively collect 125. So what's the problem? How do you diagnose this? Well, there's a lot of reasons why the labor rate will be lower. So again, I want to make this clear. There's 3 calculations. I'm only looking at one here. And in reality, this works in this case, the same math as whether you're hourly or a flat rate, because when you see the paid hours to the technicians, it doesn't necessarily mean how many hours are they there. If the technician is there for 6 or 8 hours, but they're flat rate and only bill out 6, that paid hours is going to reflect how many hours you paid the technician. So this math works the same whether it's hourly or flat rate. So this shop is either only collecting 70% of its labor rate effectively, or they're only selling 70% of the time, or really what the difference is the difference is a combination of the two. So they only collected 70% of what they say at $90 an hour, or they paid their technicians 321 hours and they only got paid 70% of those hours. The question is, how do you diagnose it? And this is a very complex thing to find out exactly what the effective labor rate problems are, because it entails a lot of things. But I want to take a look at that exact same shop later. And one thing that I love to do in our management group, some of you are in the management group, we see financial data for shops broken down in 167 lines in a composite or an Excel spreadsheet. And what we can see is on the top is month after month after month. So, the beginning of the year, you're just looking at 1 month. But to look at a full year is my favorite, to look down and see the trending. How are you doing with effective labor rate January through December? How are you doing with sold hours per repair order? How are you doing with labor gross profit, parts gross profit? You get it, it goes on and on. We look at all that data. And I don't make this stuff up. I will show somebody a composite and say, okay, here's a shop member, a shop that joined in our group. What month do you think they joined the group? And normally what happens, at least a month after or within the next few months, the effective labor rate increases. Really what we're looking at here is how many labor hours did you sell in a day, and does your labor sales exceed your part sales? And that's another webinar in and of itself, the labor to parts ratio. 100% of the people, 100% that joined our groups, more so in Canada than the US, but 100% of the shops in Canada that joined, whether it's the current group I have online or the group that I ran years ago. I've run 3-4 different management groups for different companies across the country since the early 90s. 100% of those saw more money than in parts than they did from labor. And that's a huge problem. And just quickly, it's because how often do you sell parts over the counter without labor? And people come into your shop and buy belts and hoses and water pumps and starters. Hardly ever do you sell a part over the counter, unless that you do that. Some people sell parts online, etc. But that's a separate thing. When we're looking at parts here, we're talking about just the parts that we installed in a customer's vehicle. How often do you sell labor without parts? Well, maybe not every single day, but at least weekly, there are times where you're performing some kind of labor without any part attached to it. Now, it might be 3 hours of painstaking electrical diagnosis with no parts, but after that, the repair happens and the solution's a butt connector. Well, the labor was much higher than the parts. Now, the opposite happens. You've got a transmission, and so that's parts heavy. But at the end of the day, maybe it's not going to be higher in labor, but at the end of the month, it absolutely needs to be. How often you sell labor without parts? Pretty much on a weekly basis. A brake inspection where they didn't need brakes. They just wanted the vehicle inspected for brake inspection for whatever reason. Not everybody who wants a brake inspection needs brakes. They come to you, they're looking at buying a vehicle. Can you inspect the vehicle? And you inspect the vehicle, which takes half hour to 45 minutes or whatever. You give them the results of the inspection, and maybe they'll take that, go back to the seller of that vehicle and say, hey, look, what's wrong with it? I'm going to beat down the price. But you sold an inspection without any labor to go along with that. So pretty much daily, if not every single week, you sell labor without parts, and hardly ever do you sell parts without labor. What's the gross profit benchmark? Now, this is coming from a different class altogether, but our benchmark is 75% gross profit on your labor, which means your technician should earn 25% of that labor rate. And, and the benchmark for gross profit on parts is 50%. You're not going to get 75% gross profit on parts. So parts have a lower gross profit, 50% compared to 75 on labor. You sell labor without parts. Hardly ever do you sell parts without labor. So where should most of the money come? It comes from, it should come from labor. There's no question about it. And so in our management group, I'll look at it in one shop particular. I'm looking at it, think, okay, what month did he join the group? And I looked October. I can see that because for the first time in his history, the labor sales started to exceed the part sales. So it's really a matter of focusing on the labor. What should my labor sales be? So the reason I like effective labor rate is because it brings into consideration productivity. How much time did you spend working on cars? It brings in efficiency. How fast were you at it? It brings in how much repair work you did versus maintenance, how much grunt work you did versus gravy work. It takes into calculation how much time you give away, or what we call the emotional bank account, where you look at it and say, okay, the estimate's $321, and I just don't want to say because 300 is a lot, so I'll make it $296.50. That's what I'll do. Or it took 3 hours. Oh, there's no way I could charge that person for 3 hours. I only quoted them one, and so we'll eat that time. So all the things that you do at the end of the day come right down to what is your labor rate effectively, and it encompasses all of those things. How do you calculate your own shop's labor effective labor rate? All you need to do in dollars and percentage is you take your labor sales for the month, and I recommend month, but again, you could do it daily, weekly, monthly. You divide it by how many hours you paid your technicians, and that becomes your effective labor rate in dollars, just like we looked above for that real shop. And then the effective labor rate in percentage is you take that dollar amount from above, divided by your posted labor rate, and you see your effective labor rate percentage. Now I want to come back to this shop here. The reason I think it's important to take a look at percentage is because that's where you can measure it. If the goal is 125% and you only collected 92, then you know that the shop is low. Up here, if the effective labor rate benchmark is 125, and it is, and we only collected 70. And for example, in our management group, not two of the members have the exact same labor rate. It just doesn't happen. Some people are as low as 90, and some people 125 or close to that area, 126. And so it's not important how much you say you charge, is how much did you actually collect for every hour that you sold. So we can't assume that the shop that has $120 an hour labor rate is going to do better than the shop at 89, because the shop at 89 is in a different location and their rent is cheaper and their technicians cost a lot less. We have a fellow in the group who's from Toronto, New York, and his labor rate, I think, is like $137, $147 an hour. But his technicians are costing $40 an hour and the rent is astronomical. So that's all relative to the area. So when we look at a composite, we can't just look at the across the top and say the person with the highest labor rate is the king or queen. What we need to know is the percentage. You manage your business by percentage. It comes down to labor gross profit percentage, parts gross profit percentage. So you manage your business by percentage, not dollars. Dollars is simply what we take to the bank. So that's how to calculate your own. So I'm not going to encourage you to write all this down right now. The fact is, in school, they don't even teach cursive writing anymore. It's all typing. So I'm going to send this to you, but I do prefer, you can certainly write it down if you like. I'm going to send this to you. But what are some of the things that cause us, that have us collect less per hour than we say we charge per hour? For oil changes is pretty obvious. You're not going to get $100 an hour for an oil change. An oil change might be $60 or $100 for a synthetic. The question is, how much of that is for the oil and filter? And I don't mean your cost. What did you pay your part vendor for that oil and filter? What did you charge the customer for that oil and filter? So if the oil change to me was $100, now you don't need to tell me on an invoice how much was oil and how much it should be a package deal. But internally, you need to know how much of that is my retail cost to the customer on the parts installed, and how much is the labor portion. I've seen some people that oil changes all go under labor. Well, that distorts your true gross profit on your labor, or at least the image of it, and same thing with parts. Some people, it all goes under parts, and so you need to separate that out. So if that oil change is $100, how much did we pay just for the oil and filter? And then at the end of the day, how much of it was the labor portion of it. If it's a typical oil change, a lot of shops charge $40 for that oil change, $50 for that oil change, and maybe the oil and filter is $30 or $25 or whatever it is, depending on the vehicle. And it takes at least a half hour to do an oil change at what we call an LOF, which is not lube, oil, and filter. It's labor opportunity of the future, which means we need to do an inspection every single time the oil change is done without fail. We did the oil change. We used this form that we went through and found the work that needs to be done. In a typical independent repair shop, for every $1 in maintenance and repairs that you find, $7 in needed repairs leaves. We don't find it all. We sometimes get it in, get it out. It's an oil change. Let's get it done. Let's get the inspection done. And let's get it out of here because we need to get on to the next job. Well, we need to take the time to sell that work to the customer, find the work and offer it for the customer. And if it can't be done today, say, tell you what, let's make an appointment for next Tuesday. Does that work for you? So a customer should always leave knowing when they're coming back for those recommended repairs. So oil change might be $20 an hour, $25 an hour, $15 an hour effectively. Tire changeovers, of course, you're not going to get $100 an hour on those. Number 3 is not making adjustments for non-routine tasks. I'm going to cover that in a little bit more detail when we take a look at the ways to increase your labor rate effectively. Some of these we have control over, some of them we don't. When it's tire changeovers, we don't control that. We have them come in and we change their tires, and we want to do lots of that. Sometimes the problem is quick or underestimating or determining how long it would take rather than for the technician. And what that means is if you used to be a technician and you're on the counter and a customer comes in and they say, how much for this? And you think, oh, that would take me, I don't know, half hour. And so we're quoting them half hour, hopefully in dollars, not in a half hour. We talk to our customers in dollars only, never time. We talk to our techs in time and not dollars. We talk to our customers in dollars and not time. And so I'm imposing my skill ability that I've done that job, how many times, I'm in my 50s and I used to be a tech all my life and I did that. Well, that technician may not have the same skill and ability or tools, or it may be more complex. We haven't estimated it correctly. Some people guess at what it's going to cost. They can underestimate the job. And so if you do something too quick and don't do a proper estimate, or you underestimate, or you determine how long it would take you rather than the technician doing it. The problem with that is that the better you get at something, the less that you make. If something used to take an hour and you've done it so many times it takes a half hour, should you get paid for a half hour now instead of an hour? Because that doesn't make any sense, because the better I get, the less I make. I go off to training. I take some technical training. I learn some tips and tricks. Wow, that's helpful. So I leave the shop, or at night, I give up my time. We pay for the training. I eat my time. I go back to the shop. I use those skills, and now it takes me less, and I'm going to make less. I buy a new piece of equipment, and it takes me less time than it used to. Should I make less? The better you get, the more you should make, not the less you should make. And so when you're a tech on the counter and you're imposing your skill ability on somebody else, that means that you're going to get paid less because you got really good at it and did it faster. Number 5, too much grunt work. We know what that's like, especially in an independent repair shop. And I'm sure we've all heard it. Oh, how come I get all the grunt work and he gets all the gravy work, etc. Excuse me, just taking a sip here. Not able to say no. And that is a massive problem. And my question to you here is, how many vehicles have you had in your shop that you'd wish you'd never seen in your entire life? We bring in a nightmare. It looks like a nightmare, but we think we can fix it. We can't say no to anything. We're going to say yes to everything. And we get it in and think, what on earth am I doing? I've been in shops that have had boats, but they don't work on boats. I've seen shops work on lawnmowers and tractors. Some of the stuff. I was in a repair shop in Seattle once, and there was a forklift in one of the bays. And I said to one of the techs, what's with the forklift? He said, well, it doesn't work. It's a customer's. And they said, can you work on my forklift? And Bill said, oh, sure. Yeah, we can work on your forklift. He said, it's a Russian-built forklift. We're waiting for parts to come in. It's tying up that bay. We can't move it because it doesn't move. So it's just inside. Well, how much money are they losing simply by trying to fix a forklift? Some of the stuff I've seen people work on, one shop was working on VCRs. I don't make that stuff up. Of course, I'm dating myself there. But there's times where you simply need to say no. You either need to make the job profitable or simply say no. If it looks like it's going to be a nightmare, there's nothing wrong with saying, tell you what, I'd rather not bring that in. And it's okay to say it's over our head, or, the parts availability or whatever it is. But if you say yes, 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 and now you've got stuff in your shop that you'd wish you'd never seen in your whole life, well, how much you're going to spend on that? The question would be, what's the most amount of time your shop has spent trying to find out what was wrong with the vehicle? How many hours have you spent just finding out what the problem is? I know a shop in Barrie, Ontario. They had this van that was in the shop. It was complicated. They went through everything. They went through Identifix and IATN, and the techs worked on it, and it was this intermittent, quirky, weird problem. And at the end of it, Ed thinks, well, we spent 12 hours because he uses a time clock. Well, how much does he charge the customer? Well, he didn't quote the customer. He said, yeah, I'll tell you what, bring it in, we'll look at it, we'll find out what's wrong. And the next thing you know, there's the noise outside. The next thing you know, all of this time has been spent, and they hadn't quoted the customer anything. So they had a little meeting, a discussion, and a technician's time is worth somewhere between $3 and $4 a minute. So all that 12 hours at $3 or $4 a minute, plus the time that they huddled around and said, okay, what do you think we should charge? 1 hour, 2 hours, let's do 3. Well, let's do this. Well, they came down to 2. So they called the customer and said, tell you what, we found out what's wrong with the van, and it's X number of dollars. And the customer said, well, that's a lot of money. He said, sir, we spent 12 hours on it. He said, I don't care. He said, you told me you were going to look at my car, and now you're telling me it's going to cost. You never even told me that. I believe that we never, ever start working on a customer's vehicle without them knowing what the starting part is. To begin the preliminary diagnostics procedure, the cost will be, and again, that's a separate webinar, which is not a 45-minute one. It's almost 2 hours, but it's my favorite subject. This is also my favorite subject, but selling diagnostic labor and getting paid for all the diagnostic labor that you do at the right amount of money. Low efficiency and productivity are two different things. Low efficiency sometimes is the technician taking too long for whatever reason. Some techs are just slow. Sometimes they're slow because they're good. And you've got a tech that that car's not coming back. The vehicle's not coming back. The technician checked it and rechecked it and triple checked it. I can picture some of the shops that are online now laughing because I've talked to you about the problem that you might have here. And it's great. You diagnosed that boy and you fixed it and it's done, and you verified and you did a final test drive and it's not going to come back. But it took you so long, we didn't make any money. So if the technician takes too long, we need to do something about that. Maybe they're ADD. Maybe they need motivation. Maybe they need to be inspired. Maybe they need better tools. Maybe they need better equipment. Maybe they need better tool setup so there's not so many steps. I know one shop where they're working out of 2 buildings. Well, that in itself creates some problems going back in between the two. Skipping the basics. Sometimes the technician skips the basics and they go to something more complicated. And technical training will say, look at the basics. What are the basics? Sometimes they're unmotivated, and sometimes it's a lack of proper tools. Low productivity sometimes is too much what we call expense time. There's 2 kinds of time in your day: making money time and losing money time. That's all there is. So expense time is any time of the day that you spend on things that are not making any money. So that could be waiting for work from the advisor. You're waiting for parts. The rack 'em and stack 'em, where at the end of the day, we still have all these vehicles that need to get fixed. So we bring them all in, as many as we can. And you put one up on a lift and another one angled below, and you can get 7 cars in a 3-bay shop. That's great because most of them are inside, which is what the goal is. But what's that costing at $3 or $4 a minute? Or sometimes it's running out of work. So the question is, what do we do to increase our labor rate effectively? And again, I'm going to be sending this to you. I just prefer people don't read through this whole thing in advance without going through and explaining each of these areas. So what can you do as a team? That's the service advisor, the owner, the manager, and the techs. What can we do to raise our effective labor rate? Number 1 is sell more maintenance. I've already mentioned this. Repairs are bought. People come to us. There's something already wrong, but maintenance is sold. When a customer comes in, they have an oil change, and you say, by the way, the manufacturer suggests replacing your timing belt. You're at 96,000 kilometers or close to 60,000 miles. The manufacturer recommends these services. And we believe before a vehicle comes in, you take a look at the vehicles coming in the next day. You take a look at what the mileage was. Now, if it's a new customer, you may not know that unless you asked. but you look at the mileage and you pull up from Mitchell on Demand or All Data or whatever resource you have. So when the customer comes in and say, by the way, you're at 61,000 miles, we assume you're going to be close to that. Have you had the maintenance done? No, I didn't, or yes, I did. Here's what the manufacturer recommends. So it really becomes an area of sales. And I find that too many shops are order takers and not salespeople. Number two, again, is a webinar in and of itself, but pre-book every customer's appointment every single time. Why? Because when you pre-book appointments, it's typically maintenance. You're not booking in repair. We don't know when something's supposedly going to go wrong with this car. Like a dentist, people say dentists pre-book appointments. That's not accurate. It's the hygienist at the dentist office that books the appointment. The dentist is the repair person or the diagnostics person, and they're the expensive ones. But you don't pre-book those, but you do pre-book your maintenance, your hygienist. We suggest that you indicate your next appointment is the week of, and then you call them the week before. There's a lot to be said about that, but again, this is a short 45-minute silver bullet. Number three is to use a work order rack flow system, reverse verbal communication. One of the shops I was in just recently, 90% of what they do is verbal. And here's a technician wanting to talk to the service advisor, but the advisor is busy on the phone. So they're standing there waiting to find out what the next job is. And then the advisor gets off the phone or with the customer and says, okay, take this one. Well, that should have happened without verbal communication. The technician should be able to walk up, see what the priority is, take that, put the invoice into the next rack so you can see what they're working on without going to the bay, and head off to the bay. And we recommend pouches that the keys are right in the pouch. So when the tech grabs that, there's a copy of the work order. The keys are right in there. They head right to work. They diagnose the vehicle. They come back, put it into the slot for the advisor to estimate that job. They grab their next job. There's no need for verbal communication. And of course, yes, we have a short 45-minute webinar on that subject. Limit the number of oil changes per day to a reasonable amount. You don't want to put in way too many oil changes in a day. Now, if you've got an oil change person, maybe more, but you need to limit. You do not want to fill up your day with too many oil changes. The next one is one of the biggest problems, and one of the things that reduces labor rate effectively the most is not to underbook or overbook the day. Underbooking the day screws things up. Overbooking the day screws things up. I can tell you that overbooking the day typically screws things up more than underbooking, because at least if you underbooked and you only sold, let's say, 70% of your day, well, when the customers come in and say, by the way, while it's here, could you also do this? We could do that. And when we diagnose the vehicle, we say, okay, this is what needs to be done. We can do that for you. And scheduling based on available inventory per day. And again, that's a separate session all in itself. We're looking at big picture here, effective labor rate. We believe that you need to provide the technicians with the sold time every single labor operation on every single repair order. One of the shops I was in last week doesn't give that at all. So the technician gets it, it tells them to do the job, they do the job, but it doesn't tell them how long it takes. So you're there, you're thinking, a technician's still working on this? They should have been done this like a half hour ago. And you talk to the tech and they say, well, it did this and I went into this and then, I found this. And next thing you know, a simple inspection became a comprehensive inspection. One little thing became, oh, look at this. Techs usually want to fix stuff. And they go, oh, this needs to be fixed. And the next thing you know, you're not getting paid for it. How do you tell somebody it took them too long if you didn't tell them how much time they had? So if you put, this is 1.5 hours, that's what the customer's paying for. So you're putting the sold time. They get the vehicle into the bay and they think, oh, no way is this happening in an hour and a half. And again, you talk to your customers in dollars and your technicians in time. So if the tech knows that's not going to happen in an hour and a half because the car is rusted to the nines, it's been in an accident or whatever, they can say, hey, look at this situation. This is not going to be done in an hour and a half. And so we can upsell it to the customer and ask for more time before the job is done. But I think everybody, including me, when I was a service advisor, sometimes we upsold it after it was done. We call the customer and say, there's a lot of rust on this vehicle. We already spent 2.5 hours. We don't tell them that. And say, as you know, it's pretty rusted and it is going to take longer and it's going to cost an extra $80. And they go, okay, go ahead and fix it. When will it be ready? Oh, you can come and get it. It's ready right now. No, it'll be a couple more hours. We believe we should upsell the job as soon as the technician knows it can't be done within that. The other thing is, if they're not done in that hour and a half, let's say it's diagnostics, then they need to stop at that hour and a half, do the documentation. Why? Because we said to the customer to begin the preliminary diagnostics procedures, which are these, the cost will be. If additional charges are required, we'll contact you for authorization. So what does the customer know? You're not going to spend more than $150, and if you need to, you're going to call me, and you didn't guarantee that you're going to find that problem within that $150. The next is to utilize the 4 levels of inspection every single day. We believe we should be inspecting the vehicle. There's 4 levels of inspection. There's the walk-around inspection when it arrives. There's the inspection done with every oil change. There's the inspection done on a seasonal basis, which is more of a glorified oil change and a brake inspection. And then there's the comprehensive inspection. Again, this is what these silver bullets are. We take a look at one subject because what we're really looking at with these silver bullets is material taking out of a 5-day session. Here's 45 minutes of the 5 days, because you're certainly not going to sit down and watch a 5-day webinar. Number 8 is to create service packages, what we call wraps, full meal deals. And that's where you take some higher gross profit items and put them into a package with a lower gross profit item. And that's something you could do with your technicians and say, tell you what, let's add to the oil change and make it a full meal deal, helping the vehicle get ready for the summer, helping it get ready for the winter, going on a trip, whatever it might be. Number 9, I talked about it just briefly up there, is make adjustments to your sold time for what we call non-routine tasks. Time estimating guides, are they based on routine or non-routine tasks? They're based on routine. But there's lots of reasons why a task will become non-routine. It's got more mileage than that vehicle would normally have. It's an older vehicle. It's got rust on the vehicle. It's been in an accident. The brother-in-law worked on it and screwed it up. Whatever reason, there's lots of reasons why it's not a cut and dry job. So our recommendation, and I listed it here for you, and again, I'm sending you this with all these notes in them. We suggest that you add 1/10 of an hour for every labor operation for every year the vehicle is over 3 years. So in other words, in that first 3 years, you use the time estimating guide. And once it gets beyond that, then it's 1/10 of an hour for every labor operation for each year. Now you have to make adjustments for that. If it comes in and it's a 1972 Datsun 1200, you don't go, well, that's a lot of years. So it needs to be a reasonable amount. And maybe it's under 3 years old, but the person's a sales rep and they're driving, 60,000 kilometers a year. Well, that's the exception again, not the rule. Number 10, when you're doing tire changeovers, we suggest that you have the tires that are on rims in storage in your shop balanced already before the season happens. We have a fellow in our group who hires a co-op student under a grant in the summertime, and that student does many things, but one of the things they do is they balance every single tire that's in the shop that's in storage. So when the customer comes in, let's say in November, would you like to have your tires balanced? Yes, well, they're already done. So we're saving on time. So instead of balancing and installing these tires, the balancing is already done. Almost done here. Number 11 is price jobs profitably. I already mentioned this earlier. You need to learn to say no. You don't want to have a job that comes in that you regret taking in. And lastly is what we call the best order of approach. And in order for a technician to be super efficient, we should be indicating to them, you've got 6 things to do on this vehicle. However, we're going to get you to do the diagnostics first, any inspections that are second, that's the unknowns. Then we can estimate that and get a hold of the customer, estimate it and get a hold of the customer what we found with the diagnosis of the inspection. And while we're doing that, the technician is doing the sold work that it came in for. And then after that, the upsold work that was hopefully upsold from the diagnostics or inspection. Now, some techs know this, some don't. And so it's your responsibility to say, okay, I don't want you to just do this in the order that you'd like to. We used to do this in a class where we had 4 labor operations, and I would ask the group, which one would you do first, second, third, fourth? And certainly you got a room full of technicians. Not everybody's going to do it in the same time. So again, our recommendation is we code it on the work order, diagnostics and the time to do that, inspection and the time to do that, the sold work and the time to do that, and the upsold work from the diagnosis, inspection, and the time to do that. Your goal. We believe that you need to focus on increasing your labor rate effectively, and it really can happen in a very short order. By that, I mean just a few months. If your part sales exceed your labor sales and you make some significant differences in selling your labor, you focus on that. And some of the things we looked at, there's a lot more. It's not that simple, but it can turn around. So what I encourage you to do is to calculate what your effective labor rate is now, and then say by the month of whatever, I want to be at 70% or 80%. The ultimate goal, as I mentioned, is to increase your labor rate to be at 125%. And I believe that you can accomplish at least 100 between now and the end of the year. in fact is you should be you should be able to get above that. So again, you take your current labor rate, whatever it is, door rate, posted rate, multiply that by 125%, and you're going to see what your target is for the rest of the year. By the end of the year, we want to be as close to that 125% as we possibly can. So there's a little bit of room for notes there. Just to let you know, our next Silver Bullet webinar, I'm going to be doing it next week. Again, the idea was to do 2 a month, but pretty much consistently doing them weekly. Our next one is Service Advisor Performance Factors, or what we call SPI, Service Advisor Performance Indicators versus Key Performance Indicators for a shop. We did part 1 a couple weeks ago. We're going to do part 2. And we took a look at the 4 Service Advisor Performance Factors that I thought were the most important. We're adding 4 to them. In that webinar, I'm briefly going to look at the first 4 we covered just really quickly and get into the next 4. And for those of you that are interested, and some people watching the recording, what I'm going to do is if you sign up for part 2 of next week, I'm going to give you part 1 automatically along with that. As soon as you pay a register, you're going to get part 1 immediately within 24 hours with the link and the material to go along with that. To let you know, that live webinar for Service Advisors SPIs part 2, Wednesday, July 11th. All of our sessions are at 2 p.m. Eastern. They are live and recorded. And again, the recorded, you can watch when you want, as often as you want, whatever. And the cost for those is only $30 for the 45-minute session, or close to an hour. Includes the workbook and the link to watch it online. You can download it to your computer, watch it as many times as you like. And so that information is there for you. So I wanted to keep within 45 minutes. Didn't do too bad today. So for that, thank you very much. Again, effective labor rate to me is the most important calculation of all. I want you to encourage you to find out where you're at. Where are you? Where should you be? 125% of that. And then take the time to go through these. What can we do to reduce the times that it reduces it effectively? You're not going to eliminate all of these. They're a factor of life. It's the nature of our business. But if we can put a heavier focus on these, and you will see your effective labor rate might increase 8% over the next month, and then 10% and 15% or 20%. And I don't exaggerate. You can effectively get from where you're at to 100%. Bottom line is, wouldn't it be nice to collect what we say we charge per hour? With that, thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, my email is kelly@kellythecoach.com, kelly@kellythecoach.com. Again, thank you for your attendance. Take care.